Thank you, John, for that introduction. It's a pleasure to join you all here today. And I will just shortly share my screen. Can everyone see that? Great. I like to start off by giving a bit of a background on how Shaheen and I came to work together in this virtual trial space within a digital therapeutic company. And then I'll have him speak a little bit about the vision of running an R&D organization in the digital space. We both joined Learning Corp about a year ago, where we were tasked with developing a robust clinical organization to transform the company's digital wellness product into a suite of approved digital therapeutics for different various indications such as stroke, TBI, and Alzheimer's disease, to name a few. The products leverage large-scale data and AI to augment brain recovery from injury or decline by delivering a personalized course of speech, language, or cognitive therapy, which is accessible via any smart device. Shaheen, would you like to share a little bit about where we were and how we initiated a decentralized approach to our trials?
Absolutely. No, thank you, Laura. And, thank you for the chair and moderators and for everyone who's hosting this, this conference. Yes, so essentially we were charged to take a tech organization and make it into a clinical development organization, but not the budget of big biopharma. And that was our charge. So create regulated products, those that would have commercial appeal and have market access, and get it widely distributed with a pretty small, resourceful, I would call very nimble group in which we established the classic functions of clinical sciences operations, data science, medical affairs, and regulatory and compliance affairs as well. And we had a unique population, neurological populations with communication disorders, cognitive disorders, speech and language disorders. So these are not the easiest to confer remote assessments, let alone participate in virtual or fully decentralized trials. We had preliminary data before we decided to embark on decentralized trials. That was largely where our direct-to-consumer application. So we have over 100,000 patients that use the application called Constant Therapy. It is classified as a health and wellness application. However, there was some data collection about some demographics and reasons for having those types of deficits, which actually kind of honed into where therapeutic areas that we want to pursue. And naturally what rose above the rest was post-stroke aphasia, which is a communication disorder, and also traumatic brain injury associated aphasia. We easily could have started off based on that signal and got into a large engagement with a CRO and have a virtualized trial, or even a traditional or hybrid type of trial. But we knew that there's going to be a lot of pain points that were never actually explored by anyone else. Certainly in this population, certainly using end-to-end complete decentralized platform. And that's where Laura and I merged together.
Thank you. So we wanted to take a little bit of time today to draw out 3 of some of the main points we have learned around the way that we wanted to share during the fall conference as well. So first, let's just start with a brief introduction of what the definition of virtual means. There's a lot of phrases out there: remote, decentralized, siteless, but really the expectation is a seamless end-to-end workflow where it was the promise to enroll more patients faster, improve patient retention, and reduce costs. And it gave a way for participants who may not have the time or means to visit an actual physical site. All that being said, we wanted to break down a few myths for you today. The first one being around rapid recruitment. As you all probably have been familiar with the statistics on it, between 50 to 60% of randomized clinical trials do not actually meet the original recruitment targets. And 70% of the potential participants live even more than 2 hours away from the nearest study center. And so with the solution and with virtual trials and remote monitoring, assessments, telehealth medicine platform capabilities, we could reduce the transportation barriers. We could increase the convenience of the participation for the patient experience. And ideally, we would increase that rate of recruitment, which we all really work day in and day out to figure out how best to elevate that main barrier to recruitment. And although certain barriers to trial participation are indeed elevated with virtual solutions, we face some of the same problems with recruitment, but in a different setting now. And Shaheen, if you're like to speak to some of the points.
Oh, certainly. So I also sit on this ISCTM, and where we review much of FDA guidances. And for the last several years or so, there's been a tremendous interest in diversifying patient populations. And there are many measures that we could take. In fact, one of the modalities that's been purported to bridge the divide because of access issues, and where largely metropolitan centers or the recruiting centers, where decentralized trials, if you have access to connected devices, you could participate in these types of studies. And so it's collecting more unique subpopulations than we would not have, different demographics, different behaviors, and different analytics. So I think that was a big driving point of recruitment. So it's not just rapidity, it's also the quality of patients. Of course, it makes or breaks the study if you recruit properly, but also once you get your analysis, if you don't have the patient subpopulations, then it might not meet regulatory muster. You might have additional costly studies to pursue.
Great, thank you. And in speaking to that, there's that whole issue we've used, we've had experience using Facebook and Google ads as different target populations to kind of identify how to relieve the homogeneity and the ability to target diverse populations. But it is a quite costly marketing tool on top that you would have to invest in as well, and realize that we are still targeting participants who are social media savvy, engage on these platforms, and already have some smart tech capabilities. And in terms of our population that we were trying to target, those created some complications. And so we had to, introduce the idea of caregivers and have caregiver support and incorporate that in our study design.
Precisely, Laura, and really reaching out to a network because you're highly biased if you're using these targeted ads. These are individuals who are already going to be online, particularly in psychiatric trials that might actually not have the positive valence and motivation to engage to any degree, whether you have pop-ups or not, or targeted advertisements. And particularly with rare diseases and those situations, classic ways to engage are professional societies. And there's a way to mediate the two, because a lot of those professional societies have support groups and peer networks, and these are recruitment paces as well. Mm-hmm.
Great. And in terms of really the adherence to the intervention and really shepherding the subject through the virtual visits, it's quite the same lift that you would need in a traditional setting, but now the idea will be with telehealth touch points and making sure it's not only to monitor their symptoms and administer remote assessments, but also to check in on their progress, in our case, with this digital therapeutic solution.
Yes, it's not as simple as build an app and request everything you want. You have unlimited PROs and you're going to get this level of data. No, people turn off devices and tracking and geolocation, or don't make entries within your allotted window, and you have statistical nightmares. And so I love how this myth is called rapid recruitment, because it's not rapid, nor is it quality if these measures are not put in place beforehand. So in creating the synopsis and in creating your protocols, having more patient engagement. I mean, this is the true nature of a patient-centric organization, whether they're involved from the start, essentially, I think is important, not too burdensome or fatiguing, because I think there's also a myth out there, because now they're doing it in the comfort of their home, you could throw anything at subjects. It's just not the case. Yeah.
Yeah, wonderful. And now we're moving on to our myth 2. This is a kind of wide encompassing category, so we'll try to do our best to fly through this quickly. And it's regarding remote data platforms. Having worked and seen integration of various tools as part of the recruitment side and from the sponsor end, the data platforms are some of the most crucial decisions you find yourself making, as this touches all aspects of your analysis, which then informs your entire study design, your market submissions, et cetera. And you find that that is quite scattered across multiple proprietary systems. We all know there's a lot of competitions and great systems out there. However, they're often independent and incompatible with each other. And it makes the process a little bit difficult to recruit and retain participants when they have several apps on their phone, one for checking in on their assessments, one for actually going through their therapeutic intervention. And then another one, pinging them on email reminders. So it is quite a lot that we are throwing at them in this setting, as Shaheen mentioned earlier. The solution, obviously, with virtual trials, we do have these technological platforms now to give patients access to wearables, to e-pros, to telehealth visits. But in order to harmonize all these various digital efforts, there needs to be a little bit more transparency and integration into one whole system that can make it the patient experience and also the sponsor and sites who are conducting all manners of studies more efficient.
You know, I really like how you mentioned the sponsors, investigators, and so on. No, we're obviously subject or patient-centric, but remember, there's a lot of interfaces that these investigators and sites also have to deal with. And just because you make now everything a virtual solution doesn't mean that they're interoperable and that mistakes can't happen, you know, in entering data into one platform or another, or missing data and so on. So a lot of forethought needs to come in place for that seamless solution. And there are many solutions, you know, single sign-on, or there's these sequencing programs that after you complete one, there's some logic built in into moving into the next stream. Or these modular types of formats. You know, you have a single dashboard and you go through it in a pictorial fashion. So yeah, a lot of ways that, you know, we unfortunately, we're the ones, we're the guinea pigs, and you know, through trial and error learned of that, and we're able to adapt. That's the beauty of the virtual trial. You know, our first cohort and so on got through one, you know, state, and then we were able to pivot and move on to make the subject journey, investigator journey, and sponsor journey harmonized. Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. And it is one of your kind of largest expenditure associated with your bids and your contracts. But honestly, optimizing for all these processes will have a high return on investment in the long run, both for your patients who are going through and participating as part of the trials, but also for the organization and their end goals in delivering these therapeutics at the hands of their patients in a quicker and expedient fashion.
Precisely. So when you're in the vetting process, RFP process, and so on, interoperability, particularly with whatever electronic database system that you're securing, is quite important and should be on your checklist. Yes.
And now moving on to one of our other myths. As you can see, we are wearing the hats of a digital therapeutic company. You know, the space is occupied by a very small group of companies, which most everyone's aware of. And so it's something unlike drug development. You know, software development is not currently a linear process. Software as a medical device is dynamic. You know, it's ever evolving, and we're learning from real world data that are, you know, from both from our wellness products and also from our study products. And, you know, we get feedback from users, we have code revisions. The machine learning platform behind it is able to inform us based on the rules and tasks that we then design new content. And basically we upgrade every time there's a detection of a bug or something that goes wrong within the system. And so the FDA has had this tremendous task of really trying to understand what this field would mean, that, and what would a quality regulated product would look like from their lens. And so it's kind of set the stage for the landscape for all these companies. And I'll let Shaheen speak a little bit more about some recent wins and examples of people who have been through the various regulatory pathways.
Oh, and certainly. And we fully recognize, obviously, that you could deploy decentralized pathways in components or a full end-to-end solution. And you could apply it to traditional drugs development or biologics development. And then also, of course, it's well slated for software as a medical device and the interconnected, you know, type of devices. And that's what the space that Laura and I happened, you know, to be in this particular venture. Now we're in this pandemic, and one of the silver linings is that the regulators, the health authorities, have particularly taken key interest in making some leniency into what used to be this archaic, just burdensome assessments that did not really add any true value to your end results. You know, people are having a different perspective on it. And that's why virtual trials, I think, are going to skyrocket in various therapeutic areas. It used to be where, oh no, you can't do it, and people who have cognitive disabilities. Nope, we kind of proved them wrong. And We actually, released positive phase 2 data and soon to be published of a fully, decentralized trial in the aphasic population. Of course, there's a group of folks that will tout that you have to take a regulated pathway to have, meaningful adoption. And I think, it's the whole adage in education. If there's no assessment, there's really no learning. Assessment drives learning. Same thing in development. I actually think regulation drives development. And to that degree, you apply the principles of a clinical development organization, of compliance, of regulatory agencies to a tech company, a medical device company. It's its own nuances, and a lot of structures need to be placed. Of course, there's been recent wins, and they're all listed on this particular slide. The most recent being Achilles, product, market approval for ADHD or components thereof, and that's touted as that video game platform that was approved. Pear has a variety of regulatory wins with its own nuances and commercialization and adoption. And then you have many downfalls, in Proteus Health and digital pills and so on. We have to learn. We're all in this together. We're all shaping it. And I think that with regulatory procedures and guidance, there's going to be stricter pathways, but more also de-risking our pathways. Right now, when we decide to pursue this, are we going to pursue this as on the drug pathway? Should we go through the traditional phase approach of design, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on? Should we do this as a medical device? Would a single center trial be sufficient, to achieving our endpoints, or is it some fusion? And even the FDA, and hearing from heads of various centers and divisions are contemplating, whether a new center or a new division needs to be established for this whole SAMD, software as a digital, as a medical device, or digital health solutions, digital therapeutics, you name it, in whatever era the nomenclature has been. Yes.
Yeah, and with that being said, we kind of want to leave you with some lessons learned from our end and our perspective from today. And one of them is basically what Shaheen was referring to. Creating your clinical and regulatory pathway as a tech company is something that is crucial to the build out of your vision for clinical development. And we're not just talking, Q1, Q2, we're talking long-term, looking out to year 5, because as you saw previously, it could take up to 2 to 3 years to get everything designed, your studies run through and get into the market submission process. And you want tangible deliverables and milestones set across this time frame in order to be able to meet your mission goals, and making sure that they're incorporated with the entire organization's goals as well. Shaheen, if you want to talk a little bit about the forecasting and building of teams.
Oh, sure. And just on that note, this is where the discipline without the resources of a pharma company necessarily as the clinical development plan, regulatory approach, and then the resources necessary to tie those in. Often we're dealing with less or under-resourced type of organizations, which might have more emphasis on the product development and engineering than creating the clinical evidence needed for adoption or regulatory approvals. And so that's important. And this is where these two principles of building the internal talent and tap into external experts is quite important. The internal talent have this fiduciary responsibility. You don't need to replicate all of the functions of large, clinical development organizations, but having those levels of competencies internally that have the fiduciary responsibility, so you can review and have oversight and vet these materials if you're using CROs or contractors, consultants, is quite important. And forecasting and managing your finances. Unfortunately, we've seen a lot of trials, particularly in the digital health space, and not because of efficacy or safety reasons, much less safety than drugs for sure, it's because funding runs out. And so this is where well-designed studies that have go, no-go decisions, not pursuing all indications as once, and having discipline in your CDP is quite important, and potentially even using real-world evidence if you already have a direct-to-consumer or enterprise solution out there to support and hone in on your patient population so you don't have to have so large studies.
Wonderful. And with that, we want to thank everyone. Ooh, I think my screen froze. We want to thank everyone for tuning in to us, and really appreciate everyone, the panelists and attendees, on hearing us today.
Yes, Laura, and it looks like in our Zoom conference we have a good number of
Ye-
questions, which I love. This is a stimulating discussion. We could, if you want to pull them up as well, we could tackle them.
Yes, I am trying to, let's see. I'll have to probably stop sharing. And here we go. Okay, so one of the question is, where were the trials conducted? I presume mostly in the developed world. So yes, we were a US based, and I think parts of Canada but then we had to do a quick amendment. So we recruited across the US for our particular studies.
That's right, and we already said there's an inherent bias in offering these types of solutions. However, I have actually participated in studies where you are not as affluent or as connected than the States and in Canada. And that might involve more using provision services or creating actual networks and Internet of Things types of devices for them. And of course, behaviors change. So it's not as simple, hey, I could now establish a tower and then we have a group and we have a Wi-Fi and we have a connected amount of individuals, or they go into hubs that are in their community or so on. But if their behaviors or in their interactions change, and that's what you're measuring as an endpoint, traditionally in America and in Canada and the UK, you have to apply it differently. So great question there. Yeah.
Another question we have is, how was patient confidentiality maintained if the app was not used by a designated person, i.e. anybody could enter the data?
This is fun. So, we have a short period to answer, or actually just portray all of the lessons learned through our studies. This came up. This came up internally through patients, through our user agreements, and through the health authorities, namely the FDA. And the real gist of it is human fidelity is one aspect of it, and also integrity of the data, the endpoints, the assessments. And Laura, do you want to mention some operational ways that we have addressed that?
Yeah, so, with our particular population, we had caregiver support alive in there. So we had to develop ways and operational procedures, making sure that we could, in some ways, monitor the way they interacted, the patient interacted with digital therapeutic, making sure that there was no influence from the caregiver itself. And in terms of the data aspect of it, we had a bi-weekly telehealth check-ins. So that means we were assuring, checking in on their symptoms, and the way our app is built, we have an internal dashboard. So we can see the metrics of their engagement. We can see and notice what they log in as their symptom checks. And so that was one of the ways we were able to monitor that aspect.
Yes, yeah, and another, actually, just I'll share a little story. We had actually one individual, one subject who was assisted a little excessively by the caregivers, and because we had this, video recordings and audits and independent reviews. And so on, individuals who administered it, and then people who were blinded, to that level of administration, we actually detected that one of the caregivers was actually feeding in answers to the assessments to the patient through this process. So having the process, but also abiding by the process, having those audit checks, and having the data for review. It actually kind of segments into the next questions. Can you comment on source data verification in the digital therapeutic space? First and foremost, we are many times we're directly entering into the source, and there's no intermediate paper trail and auditing and how you keep those types of informations, but that are time stamped and signature stamped and password protected. So you have these whole digital audit trails that goes along with it, and it gets attached to it. All recordings, all assessments were recorded and archived and available for review internally, externally through health authorities and so on. Any other measures, Laura?
Not that I think of, but this is also an interesting conversation point to bring up, and I think it's very short time, but this is something also that where we could really get into discussion about blockchain and its use in this type of setting, but that's a whole nother presentation, but something to ping on people's minds regarding that. Great source for their verification and time capturing.
Perfect. And the last one looks to be, have the apps received approval outside the USA? So I will say no, but intentionally not. That's not been part of our CDP. Because it's actually a very culturally specific type of program. We have American English, natural language processing, and AI built in this population. One, English limits you, and then two is the American accent and other types of features. Now with that application, we're moving into more a phonetic basis and in Spanish. And there is a Hindi version because I happen to be an investigator-initiated study and so on. But many of those jurisdictions don't have the proper regulatory pathways for software as a medical device, so we wouldn't pursue it in those scenarios. Yes. Good.
I think that covers our
Yes,
questions.
and Laura, how should they reach out to us if they do
Yes,
have questions? Yes.
I think I have it on my slides. Feel free to reach out, and I can share the slides, Sam, after this. But I think I stopped sharing by accident. And so our email contact is on the live slides for people to feel free to, if you have any questions or concerns regarding the presentation or would like to discuss further or any advice when running their own remote virtual trials.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you.